How to stop overthinking at night. What the Buddha taught about mental noise. Tonight, the room may already be quiet. The lights are off, your phone is face down. No one is texting you. No one is calling your name. No one is asking anything from you right now. And yet, strangely enough, even though everything outside has gone quiet, inside it still hasn't. Yesterday is still looping. Tomorrow is already rushing in. A few careless words from someone still feel lodged in the heart like tiny splinters. One small mistake somehow grows large enough to cover your whole life. Most people call this overthinking. But if we look more deeply through the Buddha's teaching, the problem is not merely that thoughts arise. Thoughts can arise. That is natural in conditioned things. What makes suffering heavy is not simply that thoughts are there, but that the mind goes into them, marks them, delights in them, clings to them, and then drags them further until they become my story. That is why so many people are not exhausted only because of life outside. They are exhausted because the mind inside never stops manufacturing stories. And the Buddha's answer is not to place pretty thoughts on top of painful ones. It is not positive thinking to drown out the noise. It is not finding a new thought to cover an old one. It is not using one set of thoughts to fight another set until you become even more tired. It is seeing directly what gives thoughts their power over the mind in the first place. When once that is seen, learning not to keep feeding them, not hating thought, not hating yourself, not running away from life, but knowing clearly and then not adding more. Most people try to solve overthinking by managing the content of thought. If this thought hurts, they replace it with a better one. If they are anxious about work, they distract themselves with something else. If they fear the future, they find a comforting sentence and lay it over the fear. That may help for a little while, but it still does not touch the root. Because even if you change the topic of thought all day long, if the mind still loves to run after things, still loves circling around itself, still keeps taking everything as me and mine, suffering remains. This is where the Buddha's teaching goes much deeper than ordinary advice. Ordinary advice asks, "What are you thinking about?" But the Buddha points more deeply and asks, when a thought arises, what is the mind doing with it? That is a very different question. Imagine someone who has worked all day until late. It is already past 2 in the morning, but sleep still will not come. The room is quiet. There is only the soft hum of the air conditioner. The body should be able to rest by now, but inside the head, the meeting is still going. Wano's work, money, the future. A sentence that should have been answered differently. A person who still cannot be let go of. And then it does not stop there. A second layer appears. Why can't I stop thinking? What is wrong with me? Why am I like this? If this keeps going, is my life going to fall apart? Do you see it? What began as only a few thoughts turns into self-judgment, fear, pressure, and exhaustion. Many people do not suffer only because of what happened outside. They suffer because the mind keeps extending the event, adding to it, interpreting it, stacking more onto it, until the burden becomes far heavier than the original thing ever was. Sometimes it is not just thinking. It is thinking, then getting stuck in the thought. Thinking, then secretly enjoying it. Thinking, then taking hold of it. In Dharma language, this is the crucial point. It is not merely that something contacts the mind and a feeling appears. It is that once contact happens, the mind moves into liking, disliking, grasping, marking. Then craving follows, then clinging follows, then suffering follows. So when restlessness or mental noise arises, what matters most is not only the thought itself, but the force in the mind that wants to grab it. Some thoughts are not even hated. We secretly enjoy them. We chew on them. We press on them. We rehearse them. We give them importance. We invite them to sit in the center of the heart all night long. That is what must be abandoned. Not by suppression, but by no longer feeding it. Not by forbidding thoughts to arise, but by not letting them become another house for self to live in. The Buddha points very directly, when you know the mind has gone out, know that it has gone out. When you know it is following, know that it is following. When you know it is delighting, know that it is delighting. And then do not continue it. No need to open a courtroom in your head. No need to form an investigation committee at 2 in the morning. No need to be the judge, the lawyer, the defendant, and the witness all in one night. That is exhausting enough on its own. On its own, just know, now the mind has gone out. Now the mind is beginning to get hooked. Now the mind is beginning to build more story, and then stop feeding the fire while it is still spreading. This matters a lot, because when some people hear teachings about thought, they misunderstand and think, so I must not think. I must cut it all off. I must have no thoughts at all if I want peace. No. The earlier you know, the sooner you stop following. And the sooner you stop following, the less time a thought has to grow. The Buddha gives a sharp image for this, like a drop of water falling onto a hot iron plate. It touches and it vanishes. Of course, at the beginning of practice, we may not be that quick, but the image shows the direction. Many thoughts are not powerful in the beginning. They become powerful because we give them time, space, belief, selfhood, and then let them chair the meeting all night long. After that, we complain that the mind never becomes quiet. Some people are not only sleep-deprived, they let the mind work overtime for free every night, and not even a little overtime pay. If you watch closely, you will begin to see something else that matters. Sometimes a thought has not even become a sentence yet. It begins as something in the body, tightness in the chest, tension in the stomach, a stiff neck, heat in the face, a small discomfort arising inside like a light ripple, saying that something is not quite settled. In modern language, we might say the body sends a signal first, and then the mind interprets it. Some understandings from psychology and neuroscience point in a similar direction. Human beings do not suffer only from the story itself, but from how they interpret internal signals and then build more story on top of that. But the Buddha sees even more deeply than this. It is not only that the body sends a signal. It is that ignorance is still there, craving is still there, clinging is still there. So the mind quickly takes what has arisen and turns it into my issue. A discomfort in the body becomes anxiety. Anxiety becomes a personal problem. The problem becomes identity. And then we carry it under the names I and mine. But if we catch it while it is still only a small ripple in the body, before it becomes a long story, the whole cycle can be cut much earlier, much more gently, and with far less damage. That is why returning to the body, and especially to the breath, matters so much. Not because the breath is magical, not because it is a fashionable calming technique, but because it brings us back to the ground before thought builds an entire world again. The Buddha gives the image of 6 animals, each wanting to go in a different direction. Without a firm post, they drag one another everywhere in confusion. Our life is very much like this. The eye wants to see, the ear wants to hear, The nose wants to smell, the tongue wants to taste, the body wants pleasant contact, the mind wants to run after one thing after another, without stopping. Without a stable post, life is dragged around all day long, dragged until it is tired, dragged until it is muddy, dragged until even rest no longer feels like real rest. But if all of it is tied to a strong post, at first there may be pulling, struggling, an attempt to go back to the old direction, but eventually it grows tired and settles down. That post, in practice, is the body, it is the breath, it is the grounding we return to when the mind has scattered. So the breath is not something small, and it is not only a tool to make the mind feel lighter, it is a foundation that helps the mind grow steady. And when the mind grows steady, it begins to see truth more clearly. When thoughts arise, do not rush to believe them. Do not rush to argue with them. Do not rush to fear them. And do not rush to hate them. Return to knowing, breathing in. Return to knowing, breathing out. If the mind runs, know that it is running. If the mind starts following, know that it is following. If the mind starts arguing in the head, know that it wants to argue. Then bring it back. If it runs again, bring it back again. If it runs 100 times, bring it back 100 times. Practice is not the art of scolding yourself. It is the art of knowing clearly and beginning again correctly. But even this is not yet the deepest point. The Buddha does not only teach us to return to the breath, he also points to why the mind does not want to stay, because it is still hungry, still wanting, still delighting, still searching for something to lean on. Many times we continue thinking not because the thought is truly important, but because the mind secretly believes, if I think a little more, I will control life. If I review it again, I will be safe. If I rehearse it more, I will not fail. If I keep pressing this issue, I will finally get clarity. But many times, what we actually get is not clarity. What we get is agitation, dressed up as responsibility. And that is why many intelligent people become deeply exhausted. Not because they are foolish, but because they still do not see that the mind is addicted to thinking. Ordinary advice tries to change the content of thought, but the Buddha points to the forces behind it, not knowing things as they truly are, wanting, delighting, grasping. Once this is seen, meditation deepens immediately. It is no longer just coming back to the breath. It becomes seeing. Ah, now the mind is wanting again. Now the mind is clinging again. Now the mind is beginning to build a self out of thought again. And when that is seen, letting go is no longer a pretty phrase. It becomes real. Another layer of suffering appears when we turn thought into self. Anxiety arises and we say, I have a problem. Restlessness arises and we say, I am broken. The mind will not stop and we say, this is who I am. My life will always be like this. But if we look according to truth, thought is simply something that arises. Emotion is simply something that arises. Feelings in body and mind are simply something that arises. They arise and pass. They are impermanent. They cannot remain the same. They are not under our control. If that is so, why rush to make them into me? Why rush to make them into mine? This is not a comforting slogan. This is seeing things as they are. The moment we no longer hold them that way, the burden becomes lighter at once, not because all thought disappears in an instant, but because we stop carrying the extra weight we added on top of it. Look carefully. Many times what makes things heavy is not the first thought. The first thought may simply be, tomorrow there is something difficult to do. But the second layer says, wanting. delighting, grasping. Once this is seen, meditation deepens immediately. It is no longer just coming back to the breath. It becomes seeing. Now the mind is wanting again. Now the mind is clinging again. Now the mind is beginning to build a self out of thought again. And when that is seen, letting go is no longer a pretty phrase, it becomes real. Another layer of suffering appears when we turn thought into self. Anxiety arises and we say, I have a problem. Restlessness arises and we say, I am broken. The mind will not stop and we say, this is who I am. My life will always be like this. But if we look according to truth, thought is simply something that arises. Emotion is simply something that arises. Feelings in body and mind are simply something that arises. They arise and pass. They are impermanent. They cannot remain the same. They are not under our control. If that is so, why rush to make them into me? Why rush to make them into mine? This is not a comforting slogan. This is seeing things as they are. The moment we no longer hold them that way, the burden becomes lighter at once. Not because all thought disappears in an instant, but because we stop carrying the extra weight we added on top of it. Look carefully. Many times, what makes things heavy is not the first thought. The first thought may simply be, tomorrow there is something difficult to do. But the second layer says, that is why this is not merely about relaxation, it is about freedom. And this training does not end when formal meditation ends. Life does not only fall apart when we sit quietly with our eyes closed. It often falls apart in ordinary moments. Eating while replaying a conversation from the morning, showering while arguing with tomorrow in advance, driving while returning again and again to some old regret, sitting with the person in front of you while the mind is somewhere else entirely. We call this living, but many times it is just the mind being pulled in so many directions that it breaks into fragments. That is why mindfulness in daily life matters so much. When eating, no eating. When walking, no walking. When washing dishes, no washing dishes. When irritation arises, no irritation. When the mind is speeding up, know that it is speeding up. When it has wandered far away, know that it has wandered far away. Not to become artificial, not to perform calmness, not to move slowly in a self-conscious way, but so that the mind does not scatter itself into pieces all day long, and so that it can begin to see clearly. Things arise, remain briefly, and pass away. They should not be grasped as self. As this is practiced more often, you begin to know sooner, follow less, return to body and breath more quickly. This is not something that changes everything in one night. It is gradual training. At first, you notice late. The mind has already run far away before you wake up. Later, you notice sooner. It has gone out, but not very far yet. Later still, you may catch it while it is still only a small ripple before it becomes a major story. This gradualness does not mean the teaching is weak. It means a mind, a thigh, that has followed old habits for a very long time, must be retrained correctly, again and again, until the force of clinging begins to loosen. And as you continue practicing, something begins to grow quietly in the heart. What is pleasant will not pull so hard as before. What is unpleasant will not push so hard as before. The mind will not rush to grab. The mind will not rush to run. This is how equanimity begins to grow. Not numbness, not pretending not to feel, not suppressing everything, but clear knowing, without being dragged away so easily anymore. One day, that same person who used to lie awake all night because the mind would not stop may still have thoughts arising. There may still be work, still uncertainty, still unfinished parts of life. But something has changed. He no longer attends every meeting that thought invites him to. He sees sooner that the mind has gone out. He knows sooner that the mind is beginning to delight. He lets go sooner. He returns to the body sooner, and most importantly, he no longer believes every voice in the head the way he once did. The room may still be just as quiet. The air conditioner may still hum in the same soft way. The outer world may not have changed very much at all, but inwardly the mind is no longer being dragged in the same way. That is the real change. Not that the world must become perfectly peaceful first, but that the heart no longer runs after everything the way it used to. So the next time thought begins to drag you away, do not try to conquer the whole mass of it at once. Just do this much first. Know that the mind has gone out. Know that it has begun to mark. Know that it has begun to delight. Know that it has begun to cling. Then stop adding story. Return to one point in the body, or return to one full in-breath and one full out-breath. Then look honestly. When you stop feeding it, does it still hold the same power? Tonight, you do not need to make every thought disappear. You do not need to win every battle in the mind, and you do not need to become a new person in one night. It is enough if you clearly see, even once, that the thought that arises and the delight and clinging the mind adds to it are not the same thing. The moment you begin to see that difference, you begin to see the whole problem more clearly. The problem is not only that there is noise in the mind, the problem is that the mind believes every voice, follows every voice, clings to every voice, and then calls every voice me. The moment that is seen, freedom begins, not because the whole world goes silent at once, but because the mind no longer has to be a slave to every thought. So if tonight there is still noise in your head, that is all right. Just begin by seeing it. Begin by not following it. Begin by returning. One breath at a time. One moment at a time. One night at a time. And one day, you will know for yourself that peace does not come from forcing the whole world to become silent. It comes from a mind that gradually learns to see clearly, gradually loosens its clinging, and no longer runs after everything the way it once did.